Welcome to another episode of the Sixth Round featuring myself, Navid, Razi for MMA Weigh-In, and of course, award-winning journalist for MMA Junkie and USA Today, John Morgan. And John, a heck of a UFC on Fox card this week. This Saturday, Benson Henderson featuring Nate Diaz is the headline of this card, and it's so ridiculously stacked from top to bottom. Not only is this one of the more exciting fight cards of the year, John, but it's absolutely free on Fox, not cable, but actually Fox television. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And the fact that, through all the injuries that we've been having this year, that these main key matchups stayed together without issue is just fantastic. So, man, this looks like a great lineup. I think this is what people have been wanting to see on Fox from the beginning.
Absolutely. I can agree with that. I saw Dana White post something on Facebook earlier that made me sweat a little bit. Forrest Griffin apparently has an injury, but I thought, oh, God, here we go. Something else is going to go wrong on this UFC on Fox card. But luckily, everything is intact as of now, knock on wood. So let's get into this card, John. Rory MacDonald, BJ Penn. This is for the older guys, I think people are pulling for BJ Penn, but if you look at it on paper, there really isn't any way that Rory MacDonald shouldn't win this fight. BJ Penn has always been criticized for having lots of yes men around, not having the best training camp, or maybe not training as hard, not having the best cardio and stamina. But Rory MacDonald is training at a place that uses science for a training camp. I mean, he trains with George St. Pierre, which is really all you need to know about the guy. And I have a hard time seeing him get outmatched by BJ Penn in this fight.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, everything you're saying is correct and true. I mean, it is BJ Penn. He's one of the greatest mixed martial artists to ever live. I know he said that people don't talk about him like that anymore, but I think they really do. And so, maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, but, watching the countdown show, the Road to the Octagon, rather, hearing him on the conference call, it does sound like BJ Penn is motivated. He looks in shape from what we're seeing in the video. So I think it could be a fun fight. But when you try to figure out where exactly he would win the fight, that's when you run into problems. I think BJ Penn is fantastic. I think he's a great lightweight. I don't think he should be fighting at welterweight right now. The game has just changed too much over the years. I mean, Rory MacDonald is huge. It admits that at some point in his career, he's probably going to have to move to middleweight. He's a big, strong dude. The only way I could see maybe is I think BJ Penn is probably a little bit faster and lighter on the feet. And I think if he could hurt Rory MacDonald there and maybe get some kind of a choke in a transition or a scramble or something along those lines, maybe there's a possibility. But I think this is Rory MacDonald's fight, to be honest with you.
That is a good point, John, because actually in that Shea Mills fight with Rory MacDonald, I thought Shea Mills got the better of Rory MacDonald on the feet until MacDonald took the fight to the ground, which is obviously his world. But BJ Penn, his hands are at a whole nother level. Freddie Roach says he has some of the best hands in MMA, so I do see that. But I don't think he's going to be quick enough to catch BJ Penn. And it's funny you mentioned the countdown. I tried to make up my decision on all these fights before the countdown because they do such a good job of sucking you in. And BJ Penn is one of the best in the game at making you drink the Kool-Aid, as you were saying. But the one quote on there that cracked me up was Rory MacDonald's talking about, a lot of guys say they want to fight the best fighter, whoever they're fighting. He said, I'm just in there to collect bodies and pile them up. And it's that cold, stone cold killer. Just everything about him is just so cold that I really don't see a way that BJ Penn's going to get through him in this fight.
No, I mean, if you ever found out one day that Rory MacDonald was a serial killer, would it really bother you? I mean, you'd just be like, oh, I knew something was wrong. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, this is, again, the size difference to me, on the ground, BJ Penn is slick, but I don't think BJ Penn can get a takedown on Rory MacDonald, to be honest with you, just because of the size and the strength. Once it gets there, BJ's slick. We know that, but Roy is, a tactician as well on the ground. And again, the size and the strength. So I think if BJ's going to do it, it's going to have to be on the feet. But to be honest, I wouldn't place my money on it. I mean, it's great to see BJ Penn fight again, but I hope he continues on after this, but I hope it's at 155 pounds.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Hey, BJ Penn did take John Fitch down a couple months back, but I think now that the rabbit's out of the hat, it might be difficult against Rory MacDonald. Let's get into Alexander Gustafsson taking on Mauricio Shogun Rua. And John, here again, I think this is going to be a very ugly night for Shogun. The guy's only 31 years old, but if you didn't know how old he was, John, you would swear that he's almost 40 years old. He's been through so many wars, so many injuries with his knees and other parts that he actually reminds me of a Big Nog.
Yeah, I could see that to a point. I mean, a man that seems to be older in fight years than he is in his normal years. I think that's definitely true. And I agree with you, Navid. I'd like to make the sake of argument here or whatever, but I just think this is a bad matchup for Shogun. I mean, he is an absolute legend in the sport, but I just think it's a bad matchup. Gustafsson's size, and not just his size, but the way he uses his reach. He moves around so good for being as big and tall as he is. And I just don't see where, Shogun's going to win this fight. You think of Shogun with the dangerous leg kicks. Gustafsson fought Thiago Silva, and Thiago Silva really couldn't land any of
Yeah.
those low kicks on him. Now, I'm not saying Thiago Silva is Shogun Rua. There is a difference, but we're just looking at styles. If you think about wrestling, when he fought Matt Yushchenko did get a hold of him. He did get his hands on him, but he couldn't get the fight to the ground just because, again, Gustafsson's size and his strength. So, man, I really just think this is a bad matchup for Shogun as well. I don't think he looked fantastic in the fight against Brandon Vera. I mean, it seemed coming out of that last Fox fight, all the praise was on Brandon Vera for lasting into the 4th round. It wasn't about how great Shogun looked. So, Shogun, when he's on point, is one of the most fun fighters in the world to watch. And so I hope he is. But, man, I just think it's a bad matchup.
Yeah, I absolutely do too. And you mentioned the length here for Gustafsson, and I think he uses his length probably better than anybody else in the octagon. I was actually surprised a couple weeks ago when I said, how tall is this guy? And he's only 6'3", but he fights like he's 6'6", 6'7". Uses his length very well. He pops in and out, and I think Shogun's going to be catching a lot of air in this fight, and he's going to be getting struck with counters left and right. He's not the most agile guy. He plants his feet. He's kind of heavy-footed when he throws those strikes, and I think Gustafsson's going to be completely out of the picture by the time Shogun throws those strikes.
Yeah, and I agree. And the other thing that Shogun does is he just kind of walks straight forward. He's a Terminator that walks right into you. But, you look back at Gustafsson's fights and how great he's done at catching people with a straight or an uppercut when they come to him. He moves in and out of range, darts back and forth, and brings you to him. And Shogun will walk straight into you. But, I mean, he'll walk straight into you and be in the pocket. It's not like he shows a ton of head movement and bobs and weaves. And so, I just think I think it could be a violent ending for Shogun.
I think so too, John. And it's actually kind of ironic with Alexander Gustafsson and Rory MacDonald, because it seems like they're both the same breed of new and up-and-coming fighters. Gustafsson hasn't been training as long as Rory MacDonald. MacDonald's been preparing for this moment since he was a child, but it does seem like that same breed where it's the two young bucks against the two older guys who are legends, and I don't think it's going to end well for either one of those guys. I wouldn't mind. I think everybody would love to see BJ Penn especially get a win before riding off into the sunset, but I don't think it's going to happen for BJ Penn or or Shogun Rua. But let's get into Benson Henderson versus Nate Diaz. And John, this is one of the toughest fights that I've tried to break down in recent memory, and I'm really excited to see this fight because it's so unpredictable. But you have Benson Henderson, who is this fantastic wrestler. He's really improved his stand-up and his striking. And then you have Nate Diaz, who is at a whole nother level as far as his hands go, but he does tend to throw those punches from a distance and almost kind of reaches. And when you're fighting a very good wrestler like Benson Henderson, that really is going to exploit the takedown.
Yeah, so there's two things I see in this fight, Navid, and I agree, man. It's tough to call because Nate Diaz is such a scrapper. I mean, who doesn't like watching the Diaz brothers fight? And so dangerous, submissions and on the feet. But one of the things I look at is the leg kicks that Benson Henderson has. Those things are nasty. I thought he was going to finish Frankie Edgar with the leg kicks, to be honest with you, and then he kind of went away from him for whatever reason. But and this is in the rematch, of course. But Diaz comes at you with that really long, kind of wide base and leaves that lead leg out there, and I think he's going to get hit with a lot of leg kicks that can really be painful for him. And I don't think Nate Diaz can get this fight to the ground on his own. But Benson Henderson might be the one that brings it there. But we think about how dangerous Nate Diaz's submission skills are, but man, Benson Henderson's submission escapes have been absolutely incredible. I mean, the guy can't be choked. We've seen him get out of everything. So to me, it's all going to boil down to, I think Nate Diaz is going to want this fight on the feet, to be honest with you. As great as he is on the ground, Benson Henderson is that good in defense as well. Yeah. So I think Nate Diaz is going to want this fight on the feet. And that, to me, is where it comes down to, Benson Henderson has improved his boxing, but it's certainly not on the level of Nate Diaz's. However, Benson Henderson has those nasty leg kicks I think he could really hurt Diaz with, especially with that wide stance. To me, I think that's where this fight plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. Benson Henderson's lower body is unbelievable. He's built like an NFL running back, and he actually makes George St. Pierre's legs look small. That's how jacked he is down there. But I agree with you. I think the leg kicks are going to be a lot of trouble for Diaz, as well as the takedowns. And I think Henderson will probably use those takedowns just to... It's actually funny, in the Countdown show, Diaz also said, quote, "I don't think he's a better fighter than me. He might be a better round winner than me." And that may be all it takes to get a W in the UFC in this fight. And that's what's been the case for several of these fights.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is kind of a funny statement to make. I kind of believe it. It's kind of true when you think about it. We talk about sometimes, in MMA, you got fighters and you got athletes. And Nate Diaz is definitely a fighter, man. You wouldn't want to run into him on the street. Benson Henderson, on the other hand, is just an incredible athlete. Now, I think he's gotten kind of a nasty streak in him since he's been in the UFC. I think his aggression has turned up a notch. He really gets in dirty up against the cage. I mean, he's handled some guys up against the fence. and that could be a key position in this fight as well. So I'm leaning towards Benson Henderson in this fight. I think it's going to be a great 5-round war. Gotta love Nate Diaz. I think he's going to make this fight a lot of fun, but I'm going to lean towards, I guess, the round winner to win some rounds and keep his belt via decision.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's going to be the outcome of this fight, but you never know. That's why you got to watch him this Saturday on UFC on Fox, featuring Nate Diaz versus Benson Henderson. That's going to do it for the 6th round. For Navid, Razi, MMA weigh-in, award-winning journalist John Morgan for MMA Junkie and USA Today. We'll catch you on the 6th round next week.